Elvis provided and cared for his mother, acknowledging her devotion to him. But her love came with an impossible burden, an expectation to live the life of two. During his teens, Elvis developed an eye for the ladies, seeking out ones that looked like his mother. For those women, Elvis left a smoldering passion that's never faded.
Eloise Bickerstaff, who I think was his first girlfriend,
I guess you could say we were childhood sweetheart.
was dumped sort of hard one day when, getting on the bus, Elvis handed her a letter.
He wrote me a note today. He found another girl and told me he'd found somebody else.
That girl happened to be Magdalene Morgan, who he had been going to church with for years.
Well, I just went to church, and he and his mom and dad came in, and that was it.
Magdalene Morgan grew up in Tupelo, and her mother was a friend of Gladys. So when the two women got together, Magdalene came over to the Presley home, or the Presleys visited the Morgans, and Magdalene and Elvis were naturally thrown together.
He let everybody know it was his girl, and I let everybody know that's my boy, that's my man, leave him alone.
They were friends, and they had acted together in plays at church. They seemed to be a good couple because Gladys approved of her.
I never thought we'd be anything but married, and would have been, I guess, if Mama let me go to Memphis, but she put a no-no on that.
Magdalene Morgan is the beginning of a pattern of Elvis's girlfriends, where he picked girls who either reminded him of his mother in some way or looked like his mother.
I kind of lost my love.
About the time they moved to Memphis, Elvis had not seen Magdalene Morgan in 2.5 years. And he had taken his mother and father's marriage certificate, changed the names on it to Elvis Presley and Magdalene Morgan, and had changed the date. So even though he hadn't seen her for well over 2 years, he still evidently carried a torch for her.
He was very tender-hearted, very religious, and loved his mother better than anything in the world.
Magdalene, at 74, 75 years old today, still says he will always be my first love, and I will always love him. And she tears up sometimes when she just thinks about him in those days.
I knew the real Elvis. He had a heart of gold.
He had an impact on her, and you gotta remember, this was when he was a scruffy kid. I mean, he didn't have the good looks, he certainly didn't have the moves. He was singing by then, but it wasn't a polished voice. But he had that charisma at that early age to break a little girl's heart.
In Memphis in 1956, Elvis began a courtship intensely followed by many.
A friend of mine said, "Would you like to go to the Oddfellows Hall and see this new singer?" And I said, "I don't know. Who is it?" And she said, "Elvis Presley." It's the first time I'd heard his name. And I said, "Oh, I can't waste my Saturday night on somebody named Elvis Presley."
Elvis, at the height of his fame, dated Barbara Hearn in Memphis. Barbara Hearn looked like Elizabeth Taylor to a large degree. She was really a beautiful girl, a very smart girl.
And he was a very handsome young man, very personable, funny, and fun to be with. And when he first started calling me, he was still on tour, but he'd call every night.
Barbara is the quintessential dividing line in that he had girls on the road with whom he had sex, then he had good girls that he squired around and enjoyed their company and never had sex with them.
I think at the time I started seeing Elvis, he was still under the influence a little bit of what his mother anticipated for him. And what she wanted was a wife and lots of grandchildren.
In 1956, Elvis went back to play a homecoming concert in Tupelo. This was a very big moment for him because the Presleys had essentially been driven out of town. They couldn't pay their debts. They were not well thought of because of Vernon's incarceration. So the homecoming concert is really a great thing.
In that short span of time, Elvis went from just a nice boy who looked like a promising career to this mega superstar.
She really cared about him, but she wasn't deeply in love with him, and he wasn't deeply in love with her. But they enjoyed each other's company, and Gladys loved her.
People often ask me if I thought Elvis was in love with me, and I said yes for 3 or 4 minutes. We have a joke in our family now that my husband used to tell people that Elvis and I dated steadily for a year, and finally I had to tell him to stop because I dated Elvis steadily for a year. He never dated anyone steadily.
Barbara gave Elvis a handmade gift that became immortalized in popular culture on the 6th of January 1957.
I got a pattern for a vest, and I bought some gold lame material with black satin. I bought 3 little initials, EAP, and I had a friend's mother sew a vest for Elvis. And then the following January, he was on Ed Sullivan's show, and I just couldn't believe it. He had on my vest.
Nothing has equipped him for the fame that he has enjoyed, but that he has also suffered.
He wanted a beautiful girl on his arm, but he also wanted her to worry about what he ate and whether he was getting enough rest and all the things that mothers worry about.
He is miserable. He would give anything for 2 minutes to go back to the love and security that he felt growing up as a child with his mother.
We never had a breakup. We just drifted apart. And the reason we drifted apart was Hollywood and movies and staying up all night and sleeping all day when he was home. And I was working, and then I was going to college, and I couldn't do it.
Barbara Hearn and Elvis remained friends for a great many years, and I think the root of it is that Barbara and Gladys were very close. When Gladys was dying in the hospital, Barbara went and spent a whole day with her and came home from a vacation to go to that funeral.
In 1958, when Elvis was 22, his mother Gladys, his one true love, died. Without her to guide him, he began his search to replicate his mother's love from his childhood.
The 50s Elvis was a very sexual Elvis. In an era when no one talked about sex, when people were buttoned up, buttoned down, fully clothed all the time, everything was high, girls wore white gloves. It was such an era of conservatism and almost innocence. The 60s Elvis was greatly torn. He had met Priscilla Beaulieu in Germany. Priscilla Beaulieu was the stepdaughter of a military man stationed in Germany, and Elvis met her shortly before he returned home. He brought her to the States when she was 15, 16 years old. He expected her to be both a child and a woman. He wanted a petite woman with dark hair, as he remembered his mother being when he was very small. Several members of Elvis's entourage worried about the fact that Elvis spent more and more time with increasingly younger girls. He saw himself as more like a teenager. So, in a sense, he was searching out a woman, a girl, who was the same age he was.
In his Hollywood years, Elvis cultivated a teenage entourage.
Sandy Kay Stevens was a young girl working as an extra at Paramount when Elvis made Loving You. He liked her. She was a perky little blonde girl, and he invited a lot of those young girls who either worked there as extras or as dancers or who hung around the set. He invited them over to his hotel, and they became kind of a family for him.
I first met Elvis when I had a small extra part in Loving You. I was 13. I was so surprised to see how beautiful this man really was. All my expectations that I thought flew out the window. He was above what I ever could have imagined. It was all new and very exciting, and I just knew that I wanted to get to know this man. He made you feel like, gee, you wanted to be kind of grown up and, you know, so that he would like you.
Appearing in the same film was a rising young starlet, Dolores Hart.
I met the most charming young man named Elvis Presley. Well, you would have heard that the roof came tumbling down, and they said, "Are you kidding? You must be out of your mind. You don't know who that was?" And I said, "No." And they said, "Kid, you're crazy. That is the biggest guy in town."
I got to know him by getting invited back to the hotel. They were very strict there. They didn't want the young girls under 18 to go in his room. When we rode up the elevator, and his mom said to Elvis, "Isn't she an itty-bitty little thing?" And he says, "Yeah." He says, "I think I'll call her Little Bit." So that was my name. For the next 6 years that I was around Elvis, that's what he called me.
There was a charisma that was unbelievable, and he just sang from the depths of him. And when he moved, it was beautiful.
When I met him, he just turned 22. You know, sometimes he liked to just talk and cuddle and just depending on his mood, you know. He was very sweet, and he made you feel like a little princess. The weekends were really the time that he liked to play. He'd have everybody up, he'd play pool, or he'd play the piano and sing. I even got to sing with him a couple times. I was so excited. We all wanted to be with him and enjoyed the time that we did get to be with him. He loved to kiss, and he was a great kisser.
I think it was on that set that we had the most incredible experience of finding out that we both blushed when we kissed. Our first kiss at the end of the film, I turned absolutely purple in the kiss, and they had to stop the camera. And of course, everybody howled with laughter and thought this was the biggest laugh of all. Well, then, of course, Elvis started to blush, and he had to be remade up.
Elvis was like a kid in a candy store. I mean, it was a revolving door all the time. You know, if one girl had to leave early that he happened to be sitting with that evening, 5 minutes later, there was somebody else sitting down. Was the date for the 5 minutes or an hour or the evening. I think most of the girls were under 18 or maybe just about 18. And yes, he was having sex with them. Whatever Elvis wanted to do, I just wanted to make him happy. Every time he'd leave, finishing a picture, and leave for Memphis, I would cry, and it was the same thing, but he always would hug me, and he'd say, "I'll be back in a little bit."
The kids, they wanted just to touch him. They wanted a lock of his hair. If he had gone down on the streets, he would have been completely dismembered.
He didn't want to get married. He would get married if he could look at somebody 24 hours a day across the table. I said, that'll never happen. Here I am, just this kid, but I'm giving him advice. He liked it, but he was young. He listened. Not well, but for me, it was a deep love. I'll love Elvis till I die.
While his many girlfriends awaited Elvis's return from military service, it appeared that he'd found love abroad. As the 60s progressed, Elvis found himself torn between two different women who served two different emotional needs. One he felt he could shape, the other was like looking in a mirror.
If he had a relationship that really had some steam behind it as far as a future and perhaps a healthy future, it would have been that relationship with Anne Margaret. Unfortunately, he did not end up with Anne Margaret because he had pledged himself to becoming Priscilla's husband.
He really loved Aunt Margaret, no question. He respected her, he liked her, he enjoyed being with her.
When Anne Margaret and Elvis met on the set of Viva Las Vegas, Anne Margaret had just made a big splash in Bye Bye Birdie, which was loosely based on Elvis's own story. She was terrific looking, just a wonderful dancer, a fiery redhead, every inch his equal in talent. He was really taken with her. I mean, I think he felt she was the woman perhaps he had searched for all of his life. She was very sweet, so she could mother him a little bit, but she was also very sexual, which was important to him. And again, she was almost his mirror image in some ways.
We were in the back lot of MGM for all-night filming. It was about 11, 12 o'clock at night, and I heard some commotion, and I turned and I looked, and Anne Margaret came to visit Elvis. And everyone looked. And I saw Elvis saw that she was there, and he just blushed, and you could see he was really affected. He was melting within himself. And she comes in, and she just glowed. She was so beautiful.
They really couldn't take their eyes off each other. It was just fireworks from the beginning. You could see the electricity between them. You could just see it crackle on the screen.
I had a little part in Viva Las Vegas. I played a cocktail waitress. So when Elvis was singing to Anne Margaret near the bar area, you'll see this little blonde walk out, my hair's pulled up, and I had a little cocktail outfit on.
On the one hand, he had Priscilla, who he thought he was rearing. But on the other hand, he had Anne Margaret, who was the female Elvis, who was the only woman in his entire life who was an equal to him. But he sabotaged it because his mother had told him not to marry anybody in show business.
And he went through a battle because Priscilla was in his life and Anne Margaret was in his life.
And he certainly wasn't going to just play second fiddle to someone else in show business. His ego couldn't have stood that.
On the back lot of MGM, they had a very small trailer that was about 20 years old. Elvis, Anne, and myself walked in. It was so cramped that Elvis sat in front of this mirror with light bulbs. Anne was right next to me, and I'm doing Elvis's hair, and I had to do his hair right. And I was so nervous, and I could feel her breast on my back. She was pressed up next to me, and the electricity was flying off the walls in that room between those two. They were so attracted to one another. It was beautiful to watch.
If he was going to be dating her or seeing her on a weeknight, nobody else was allowed to be near the house or in the house, or he even made the guys leave.
I think they were truly enamored with each other, and from the second that they met, that was a deep and true love affair. They spent a lot of time together. She took him home to meet her parents almost immediately. They were off having secret affairs in hotel rooms. This was a hot relationship, and probably could have lasted into a real marriage. He never got over her.
As real as the Anne Margaret love interest was, Elvis faced a dilemma of his own, a promise he'd made.
I know that Elvis really loved Priscilla. There's no question about it. He loved her till he took his last breath. But he was Elvis. And temptation got the better of him.
Even though he was in love with Anne Margaret and he loved Priscilla, it never stopped him from having one-night stands or two or three or many multiples of women in a single night.
Elvis dated many other stars, including Natalie Wood, Raquel Welch, and Sybil Shepherd. There would be many women in the life of Elvis Presley, but there was only one Anne Margaret. In the 1970s, Elvis approached middle age exhausted, alone, and confused. The expectations of being Elvis were too great for him or anyone who might date him. His fans provided the comfort and love to keep him going.
The very thing that made him happy in the beginning and fueled him with energy drained him and left him empty.
Elvis didn't know what it meant to have a fully realized adult, romantic, emotional relationship, because he was still stuck in those teenage years.
The audience may have become a vicarious Gladys.
I don't think there's an artist in the history of rock and roll, or perhaps in the history of entertainment, who loved his fans as deeply and as sincerely as Elvis Presley.
Everybody knows me as Rockin' Robin Roseanne.
Robin Roseanne was one of the most dedicated of fans who went to Las Vegas every year and saw multiple shows. He got to know her face because she was up close to the stage so many times, and he found out, he asked her name at one point, and she said Robin, so he named her Rockin' Robin.
First became an Elvis fan when I was about 10 years old, when I saw him on the Ed Sullivan Show at my grandmother's house. But at 10 years old, I didn't know who or what an Elvis was, and it wasn't until later, when I was a teenager and I would save my babysitting money and buy all the 45s and the albums and go see the movies.
Shirley Dew was Joe Esposito's girlfriend, and Joe Esposito, of course, was Elvis's right-hand guy. And as Joe's girlfriend, Shirley got access to a lot of scenes behind the scenes.
I first met Elvis through Joe Esposito. Joe Esposito was my boyfriend at the time. We met in Las Vegas. Joe was basically the boss of the guys, the Memphis Mafia.
First time I went and saw Elvis Presley was in Las Vegas, February 1970. We drove down to Las Vegas and got to see one show. and one show only, and I didn't have the best seating. But when Elvis came out, I was just drawn to him.
He was so charismatic, people couldn't help but be drawn to him.
Well, over the years, I saw 72 concerts, and that included Las Vegas, Lake Tahoe, the Oakland Coliseum, and the San Francisco Cow Palace.
There will always be something about Elvis.
But the main thing was to get closer to Elvis so you could get that kiss, get that scarf, have him talk to you, have that personal interaction.
There were women out there, young and middle-aged and old, that would have died to be with Elvis.
When Elvis would give me a kiss and a scarf, I felt like I had stuck my finger in a light socket. It was just that kind of feeling from within, and every fiber of your being just felt like you were just electrocuted. It was a kiss, a feeling, a touch that you just can't describe.
At the Las Vegas Hilton, in the suite, he tried to kiss me in the kitchen. And I was getting a bottle of water, and he put his hands up on the freezer and tried to kiss me. And I just kind of scooted out and went back, said, "Oh, Joe's waiting," and ran back to the bedroom. I'm not sure if Elvis was just testing me, but when I tell the story to Priscilla, she just laughs and said, "No, he wasn't testing you. He was really hitting on you."
And just the thrill of, you know, seeing Elvis and coming home from Las Vegas or coming home from Tahoe, and knowing that you just spent 5 days seeing Elvis night after night after night after night, and you know, having a squirt gun fight with him, or just, you know, hanging out with his friends.
They just loved him, and they still screamed his name and tried to run up for a kiss just to touch him.
After many attempts to find meaning in his life, his quest for love came full circle.
He woke up one day and he looked at me and said, "Man, I just had a dream you won't believe. I dreamt of Jesse, and I never dream about him, but I had this incredible dream. There we were, both of us, on the stage together, both wearing white jumpsuits, both had guitars. His hair was just like mine. I was looking at him, and I thought I was looking at myself. And the audience was screaming, and we were singing to them." He said, "To tell you the truth, I think his voice is better than mine."
He had grown as far as he could grow with what he had been given in his family dynamic. And he spent the rest of his life trying to break out of it, but being chained to it at the same time.
I've heard from a lot of fans that, "Oh, we love to see that picture of you and Elvis because he was smiling and he seemed happy." He was happy. I mean, he like all of us, he had his ups and his downs. I mean, there was a lot of laughing. I mean, I was there in the last, 3 or 4 years of his life, and we had fun.
I think certain dates carried certain feelings. I think the time of her death, the actual date of her death, was always a concern with Elvis. I think it was a date he never passed without a remembrance, just as he would her birthday. He approached the age of 42, which was his known age of her age at death, even though it wasn't right. I think he felt he could very easily be at the end.
I will tell you this about Anne Margaret. I'm the one that called to tell her that Elvis had passed away. And out of all the people that I talked to, I think she took it harder than anyone. She literally hired a plane to fly her to the funeral because there was no way she was going to miss Elvis's funeral. And when I picked her up at the airport, I mean, she wasn't dressed all, fancy and all. She just had on a simple dress and had a shawl around her shoulders. And she was heartbroken. She was heartbroken.
The unconditional love of his fans supported Elvis over the years. While there were many, many women in love with Elvis, one is left guessing about Anne Margaret and what their special love could have become. Elvis Presley was a man that made the world swoon, but his heart belonged back in Tupelo, where he'd forged the bond with his one true love, his mother, Gladys.
His mother died, all hopes of living a normal life died with her.
His mom always filled his heart, and there wasn't much room for anyone else, I think. I don't know. You knew that. That's the kind of guy he was.
The beauty and the sadness were intertwined.
I don't understand not being able to be faithful to someone you love. And then we have, well, maybe he never loved anyone. I don't know.
I don't think that there was a woman on this earth that could be Elvis's true love.
For me, it was a deep love. I'll love Elvis till I die.
You know, at night when I go to bed, I say my prayers to God and I say my prayers to Elvis Presley. Thank you for letting me do this all these years and the people that I've met. It brings tears to my eyes.
If Elvis could hear me, I would, and I think he can, I would say, I miss you and I love you so much and I always will.